No one in the View studio expected such an explosion, but Angelina Jolie was determined. When she forced Meghan Markle to drop her fake activism mask, the result was a complete disaster. The View studio buzzed with an electric anticipation that was palpable even to the most seasoned production crew. The iconic set, with its vibrant colors and circular table that had witnessed countless memorable moments, felt charged with the potential for something extraordinary. Today's show promised to be particularly compelling, featuring two of the most talked-about women in the world discussing humanitarian work and global advocacy. What no one anticipated was that it would become one of the most explosive confrontations in daytime television history. Whoopi Goldberg sat in her usual moderator position, reviewing her notes with the careful attention that had made her one of television's most respected hosts. She sensed that today's dynamic might be more complex than a typical celebrity panel, given the stark differences between her two marquee guests. One was a globally recognized humanitarian with decades of frontline experience, while the other was a former royal trying to establish credibility in the advocacy space. Joy Behar occupied her familiar spot at the table, her sharp wit at the ready for what promised to be an intellectually stimulating discussion about women's rights and international affairs. Sarah Haynes and Alyssa Farah Griffin completed the panel, both seasoned professionals who understood that the View's format thrived on authentic reactions and unscripted moments that revealed truth beneath polished public personas. At precisely 10:45 a.m., two separate motorcades arrived at the ABC studios within minutes of each other. From the first, a sleek black SUV, emerged Angelina Jolie wearing an elegant cream blazer over a silk blouse, her appearance understated yet commanding. Her security detail was professional but minimal, reflecting someone comfortable with her place in the world and her ability to handle any situation that might arise. From the second vehicle, a more ostentatious Range Rover with heavily tinted windows, Meghan Markle stepped out wearing a powder blue suit that had clearly been chosen by a team of stylists to project both authority and approachability. Her entourage was notably larger, including publicists, assistants, and what appeared to be a media consultant, suggesting someone who required significant support to navigate public appearances. The contrasts were immediately apparent to anyone paying attention. Angelina moved with the confident grace of someone who had spent decades in the spotlight while maintaining focus on substantive work. Meghan's movements seemed more calculated, as if every gesture was being evaluated for its potential impact on public perception. In her green room, Angelina sat quietly, reading briefing materials about current humanitarian crises while sipping water. Her preparation was focused entirely on the issues she would discuss, not on managing her image or controlling narratives. This difference in approach would prove significant as the day unfolded. Meanwhile, in the adjacent green room, Meghan was surrounded by her team, reviewing talking points and practicing responses to potential questions. The atmosphere around her was tense, filled with the kind of nervous energy that comes from someone who feels they have everything to prove and much to lose. 15 minutes to air, a production assistant announced, and both women began their final preparations. Angelina's routine was simple: a quick review of key statistics about refugee populations and a moment of quiet reflection. Meghan's preparation involved last-minute strategy discussions and multiple clothing adjustments. The walk to the studio revealed more about their respective mindsets. Angelina engaged warmly with crew members she remembered from previous appearances, asking about their families and projects. Meghan remained focused on her team, continuing to discuss messaging strategy right up until the moment she needed to take her place at the table. Whoopi stood to greet both women as they arrived at the set, her welcome warm but professional. "Ladies, thank you both for being here today. This is going to be a fascinating conversation." "Thank you for having me, Whoopi," Angelina replied, her voice carrying the quiet authority that comes from years of serious work in challenging environments. "I'm looking forward to discussing these important issues." "Yes, thank you," Meghan added, her tone slightly more performative. "I'm excited to share perspectives on women's empowerment and global advocacy." The subtle difference in their responses, Angelina's focus on issues versus Meghan's focus on sharing perspectives, hinted at the philosophical divide that would soon become apparent to millions of viewers. 30 seconds to live, the floor director announced, and everyone took their positions around the iconic table. Both women settled into their chairs with practiced ease, though careful observers might have noticed that Angelina appeared completely relaxed while Meghan seemed to be maintaining her composure through conscious effort. The red recording lights blinked on, and suddenly they were broadcasting live to millions of homes across America. "Good morning, and welcome to The View," Whoopi began with her characteristic warmth and authority. We're joined today by two remarkable women who have used their platforms to advocate for important causes around the world. Please welcome Academy Award winner and UN Special Envoy Angelina Jolie, and Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex. The audience erupted in applause, though those paying close attention might have noticed that the response to Angelina was slightly more enthusiastic and sustained. "Angelina, let's start with you," Joy said, leaning forward with genuine interest. "You've been working with refugees and displaced populations for over 20 years. What keeps you motivated to continue this difficult work?" Angelina's response was immediate and heartfelt. "The people I meet in the field. When you look into the eyes of a mother who's walked hundreds of miles to keep her children safe, when you see the resilience of communities that have lost everything but refuse to lose hope, you realize that bearing witness and advocating for solutions isn't a choice. It's a responsibility." Her words carried the weight of lived experience, and the sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. She spoke without notes, drawing from a deep well of personal encounters and emotional connections forged in some of the world's most challenging places. "That's beautiful," Sarah responded. "Meghan, you've also become involved in advocacy work. How do you approach these issues?" Meghan's answer was notably more structured and careful. "I think it's so important to use whatever platform you have to amplify voices that aren't being heard. Whether it's through partnerships with organizations or speaking out on social media, we all have a responsibility to create positive change." The response was perfectly crafted and entirely safe, hitting all the expected talking points without revealing much about actual experience or deep commitment. The contrast with Angelina's raw honesty was subtle but unmistakable. For the first 10 minutes, the conversation proceeded smoothly, covering various aspects of global advocacy and women's rights. Both women offered thoughtful perspectives, though Angelina's contributions were consistently more specific and grounded in concrete experiences, while Meghan's remained more theoretical and focused on general principles. But then the dynamic began to shift in a way that was almost imperceptible at first. Angelina, perhaps recognizing something inauthentic in the conversation, started asking more probing follow-up questions that revealed the depth of her knowledge and experience. "Meghan," Angelina said, turning to address her directly, "you mentioned partnerships with organizations. I'm curious about your work in the field. Have you spent time in refugee camps or with displaced populations?" The question seemed innocent enough, but it immediately exposed a fundamental difference in their approaches to advocacy. Meghan's pause before answering was slight but noticeable. "Well, I've worked with various organizations to support their efforts," Meghan replied carefully. "I think sometimes the most impactful work happens behind the scenes, through funding and awareness campaigns." Angelina's expression remained neutral, but her follow-up revealed a sharpening focus. "That's certainly important, but don't you think there's value in direct engagement, in actually meeting the people we're trying to help and understanding their needs firsthand?" The question carried an implicit challenge that was becoming increasingly difficult for Meghan to navigate. Her media training had prepared her for general advocacy discussions, but not for being questioned by someone with genuine expertise. "Of course," Meghan said, her voice carrying a slight defensive edge. "But I think there are many ways to contribute effectively. Not everyone needs to be physically present to make a difference." Whoopi sensed the tension beginning to build and attempted to redirect the conversation. "Let's talk about specific initiatives you're both passionate about." But Angelina wasn't finished with her line of inquiry. "I agree that there are many ways to contribute," she said, her voice remaining gentle but persistent. "But I'm wondering about the authenticity of advocacy that's primarily focused on photo opportunities and social media presence rather than sustained engagement with actual issues." The comment landed like a precision strike, and Meghan's composure began to crack visibly. Her face flushed slightly, and her hands gripped the table edge more tightly. "I think that's a rather unfair characterization," Meghan replied, her voice rising just enough to be noticeable. "Some of us haven't had the luxury of decades to build our advocacy work gradually." Angelina's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Luxury? You think having access to conflict zones and refugee camps is a luxury? You think witnessing human suffering firsthand is some kind of privilege?" The studio atmosphere grew tense as the philosophical divide between the two women became increasingly apparent. The audience, which had been enjoying the intelligent discussion, now found themselves witnessing something more confrontational and personal. "That's not what I meant," Meghan said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I just think there are different approaches to making a difference, and they're all valid." "Are they?" Angelina challenged, her voice still calm but carrying a steel that hadn't been there before. Because I've seen what happens when advocacy becomes more about the advocate than about the cause. When photo shoots take precedence over policy work. When awareness campaigns exist primarily to raise the profile of the celebrity rather than address actual problems. Meghan's breathing became more labored as she struggled to respond to increasingly pointed observations. You don't know anything about my work or my motivations. You're right, Angelina acknowledged. I only know what I see. And what I see is someone who talks a lot about advocacy but seems to spend more time promoting herself than actually helping the people she claims to represent. The words hung in the air like an accusation that couldn't be ignored or deflected. Joy Behar leaned forward, recognizing that they were witnessing something unprecedented in daytime television. That's completely unfair, Meghan protested, her voice now carrying clear anger. You don't get to sit there and judge my commitment just because I haven't spent as many years in the field as you have. Angelina's response was devastating in its simplicity. I'm not judging your commitment. I'm questioning whether it exists at all. The studio fell silent except for the quiet hum of cameras and equipment. Even the seasoned hosts seemed unsure how to respond to such a direct challenge. Meghan's composure finally cracked completely. How dare you question my commitment to helping people? How dare you suggest that my work isn't genuine? Because it isn't, Angelina replied with calm certainty. Genuine advocacy requires sacrifice. It requires spending time in uncomfortable places with people who can't offer you anything in return. It requires making decisions based on what's best for the cause rather than what's best for your image. You have no idea what I've sacrificed, Meghan shouted, tears beginning to form in her eyes. You have no idea what I've given up. Angelina's voice remained steady, but her words cut deep. What you've given up is irrelevant if what you're doing now is primarily about rebuilding your own brand. Real humanitarian work isn't a career pivot or an image rehabilitation strategy. Something inside Meghan snapped completely. She shot to her feet so suddenly that her chair rolled backward, her face contorted with rage and humiliation. This is unbelievable, she screamed, her voice echoing through the studio. I came here to have a respectful conversation about important issues, and you've turned it into a personal attack. Angelina remained seated, looking up at Meghan with an expression of calm disappointment. I've simply pointed out the difference between authentic advocacy and performance. If that feels like a personal attack, perhaps you should examine why. I don't have to listen to this, Meghan declared, grabbing her purse from the floor beside her chair. I don't have to sit here and be lectured by someone who thinks she has a monopoly on humanitarian work. As Meghan turned to storm off, Angelina delivered what would become the most quoted line of the entire confrontation. The difference between us, she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly across the silent studio, is that I do this work because the world needs it. You do it because you need it. Meghan stopped dead in her tracks, her entire body trembling with fury. For a moment, it looked like she might turn around and physically confront Angelina. Instead, she pressed her hand to her mouth, let out what sounded like a sob of rage, and ran toward the exit. Her heels clicked frantically against the studio floor as she fled, the sound amplifying in the oppressive silence that had fallen over the entire space. The cameras followed her until she disappeared through the stage door, leaving behind a quiet so complete that even the production crew seemed to have stopped breathing. For several long moments, nobody moved. Angelina sat calmly at the table, her expression showing neither satisfaction nor regret, only the quiet resolve of someone who had spoken an uncomfortable truth. The hosts remained frozen, clearly processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. Finally, Whoopi found her voice. Well, she said slowly, that certainly wasn't what any of us expected. Angelina turned to face the camera with the same calm authority she had displayed throughout the confrontation. Sometimes authentic conversations require uncomfortable honesty, she said simply. Real advocacy work is too important to be diminished by people who treat it as a publicity strategy. The audience began to applaud, tentatively at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Angelina held up a hand to quiet them. I want to be clear, she continued. I have nothing personal against Meghan, but I do have strong feelings about protecting the integrity of humanitarian work. Too many lives depend on it for us to allow it to be trivialized. As the show cut to commercial, the four remaining hosts sat in contemplative silence around the table. They had all witnessed dramatic moments before, but this felt different. This felt like the complete exposure of a fundamental divide between authentic commitment and manufactured compassion. Social media was already exploding with clips and reactions to the confrontation. The moment would be dissected and analyzed for weeks, sparking broader conversations about celebrity activism, authentic advocacy, and the difference between using your platform for good versus using good causes for your platform. Meanwhile, somewhere in the ABC building, Meghan Markle was probably locked in a bathroom, trying to compose herself enough to face the inevitable photographers waiting outside. Her extensive team was likely coordinating an emergency exit strategy while fielding frantic calls and attempting to craft some kind of damage control narrative. But the truth was irreversible. In less than 15 minutes, one of the world's most respected humanitarian advocates had systematically exposed the hollow nature of performative activism. Whether you agreed with Angelina's methods or not, her words had drawn a clear line between those who do the work and those who use the work. The conversation would be remembered not just for its drama, but for its broader implications about how we distinguish between authentic advocacy and strategic image management. In an era where celebrity activism had become increasingly common, Angelina Jolie had reminded everyone that real humanitarian work requires more than good intentions and social media presence. The truth, as she had demonstrated, doesn't care about feelings or public relations strategies. It only cares about results and the people who depend on them.